Welcome to Beyond the Good Girl podcast. I'm Gillian Ray, and this podcast is an audio memoir of when good stopped working for me, which was in 2020 when I was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer and then spent the next 2 years going through chemotherapy, surgery, radiotherapy, more chemotherapy, being diagnosed with an underactive thyroid, all sorts of things, to the point that by the time I came to the end of it, there was really not very much left of who I'd been when I went into it. I had to start sort of rebuilding from the ground up. And the good girl character kind of shows up trying to manage everything in what is ultimately a very unmanageable situation. So, yeah, this is why it's about when good stopped working. And today's episode is kind of where it all began. You can listen to the episodes in any order, actually. There's not really any specific, if you want, but if you wanted to do it chronologically, maybe you should start here. So, what kind of doctor do I need for a breast lump? And other things I Googled in Warsaw. So, in late July 2020, my daughter Kiki and I arrived on a plane in Warsaw and were greeted at the airport by my husband and my son. They met us off the plane. They hugged us. And honestly, these hugs, they were fierce hugs because we hadn't seen each other in 7 months. We hadn't seen each other since Christmas. And I think that the part of the ferocity came from like wondering if we would actually ever see each other again, or when it would be. Could be years from the way things were going, because we had last seen each other at Christmas in 2019, before there were closed borders, before the planes were grounded and movement was restricted, and we had expected to see each other in February, and so this was a long time coming. A couple of days later, I showed up at my new job at a British school in Warsaw to hand over some paperwork. So I'd interviewed for this job on Zoom about a month or two before, and I was actually the first of their overseas staff to make it into Poland that summer. And we were all sitting around wondering, would we even have enough staff to open in August? It was that kind of situation. You felt very relied on. My inner good girl was pleased that she had made it across the borders through 3 different countries during a pandemic to present her paperwork at the desk of the principal on time. And anyway, about then I had about 3 weeks before we actually started work. Now, my son was getting ready to head off to university in the UK. So we had just these few weeks together. And for a few minutes, I actually allowed myself to believe that things were returning to normal. I mean, for us, normal still meant like there's 6 of us in the family, all being in different countries. Our other daughters were at uni. Before this, my daughter Kiki and I had been in Mongolia. My husband and my son had been in Warsaw. But, we were all still separated, but things were returning to normal in that we could move between countries again and actually start to see each other. That was what we thought was going to happen. So I started my job in this British school in Warsaw. And on the 3rd day of my induction, so before all the children came in, we're doing curriculum work and discussing safeguarding and figuring out how far apart all the desks have to be for COVID rules. I fell down some stairs on my way into work. Now, this happened because I was navigating a new city with bus routes and stuff and using Google Masks. I had a face mask on, so I couldn't see properly anyway. And I fell down a flight of stairs on the way to catch a bus. Now, I hobbled into work anyway, and the worst thing about that day was the school had 2 sites, and we had to go to the other site because we were having some training over there. And so I had to get on a tram, hobbling along all day with this really sore foot, which I thought, I'll just get to work and I'll be able to rest it. But no, we had to go to this other place. And by the end of the day, it was swollen. It was going black and blue. It really did not look good at all. And, my friends, my new colleagues were going, "Oh, God, you really ought to go see a doctor." And I'm like, no, let's not make a fuss. Everything's fine. No, I'm okay. I'll be in tomorrow. And, I struggled in the next day to work, but it was looking really dodgy by then. I couldn't put any weight on it. And, it was going a really, really weird colour. And they were like, "You've got to go see a doctor." Now, you get medical insurance as part of your package when you're an international teacher. But in this job, mine didn't start for 30 days, and this was day 3. So I had to go find like a local normal hospital. Like, because you have your normal, I'm a Polish resident, so I have Polish residency. I can use their equivalent of the NHS, but obviously it's a bit harder to navigate. So I go trying to do this. So my husband and I, we get an Uber to go to this big hospital that somebody said we should go to. And we arrived there, and there's a triage tent that looks like an army camo tent in the grounds. And they sent us away saying, no x-rays, no x-rays. So I was like, okay. Then we go to another hospital. And again, they're like, no, this is not the right hospital. You need a different kind of hospital. And to be honest, at that point, this was enough for me. I was like, it's fine. Even if my foot is broken. One of our daughters broke her foot once. They didn't do anything with it. They called it radical non-intervention. No one's going to do anything anyway. I'm not going to bother about it. I'm just going to go home, take a couple of days off work, take some painkillers and rest it. So yeah, the next day I did call in sick to work and say I needed a couple of days off. And they were like, well, that's fine, but you know that you don't have any sick days in the first 30 days of your contract, so you're not getting paid. And I was like, okay, fine. But anyway, so that was sort of over the weekend. I just thought I'll just rest it up. I'll be fine. And on Monday, I hobbled back in. And my teacher friends were like, "Oh my God, you really don't look good. Your foot looks awful. You have to go see a doctor." And I eventually bit the bullet and paid out of pocket to go to a private hospital around the corner from me, where I met a slightly racist doctor who thought he was a real comedian but was making really inappropriate jokes. Got an x-ray. It wasn't broken. He gave me a prescription for painkillers, which later turned out to be just paracetamol, and told me to rest it. And he also seemed to be overly concerned about DVD and gave me a bunch of injections to take in case I got a blood clot, but I never took them. I just shoved them in a drawer. So I rested it a bit more and then, kind of thought nothing over it. It healed. So about 3 weeks later, so towards the end of August, it was still quite painful, but I was also in massive pain with my boobs. Yes, they had gotten very swollen and lumpy, and I just couldn't get comfortable at night. And I was like, what the hell's going on with these boobs? So I Googled, what's good for sore, lumpy breasts, and why is it happening? Dr. Google told me this was likely perimenopause and to try evening primrose oil. So my husband was then promptly dispatched to go seek this out, armed with pictures of various bottles that I'd got on screenshot and sent to him on WhatsApp, and his very own Google Translate to go to some Polish chemists and see if he could get me this, which I took. I don't know if it had any effect, but I had to try something. The lumps eventually went down and the pain subsided, but I decided to add a section to my bullet journal. Now, I was obsessed with bullet journaling at this time. This was like my absolute new thing. I discovered it. I'd bought all these lovely little stationery and I was creating up different sections, which I kind of actually needed to run my life because I had to get up at like 5:30 in the morning to get all the buses to get across town to get to where my job was. And I had the biggest timetable of anyone on the staff for some reason. I don't really know why. And I was also at that time, I decided to become a vegan. So I had like recipe plans. I mean, the good girl was on fire. She was like reorganizing my entire life. She was like, and we're going to do it with a bullet journal. So yeah, to my bullet journal, I added another little section. Let's call it Boob Watch. Actually, I really wish I had called it that. I was being very sensible and I named it Perimenopause Symptom Tracker, like the good girl that I am. And kept the name Boob Watch in my head though, because that is a good name. Anyway, a week or so later, I did feel like there was a lump still in there on both sides. And so it was like, but only one, and really high up, kind of like at the top where, almost like where your bra goes in from bra to strap, like that sort of point, just really high up, but on both sides, in exactly the same place. And then a day or so later, the left one disappeared completely. But the one on the right side, that started to feel really achy, like it was really still sore. And it felt like, it also felt kind of warm as well. It was still really small. The lump was tiny. I mean, I asked my husband to feel it and he said he couldn't feel anything. But then, of course, he may not have been the best person to ask, ask a man to touch your boobs. He might have been a little bit distracted. Anyway, so I turned again to Dr. Google. I have a painful lump in my boob, I told it. And Dr. Google was very reassuring about cancer lumps not being painful. But he also told me to check with my GP if I was concerned. I didn't have a GP, and my previous attempts to see a doctor in Warsaw had put me off visiting one for anything but an absolutely dire emergency. And I reassured myself enough that this lump was probably going to disappear like the one on the other side had. I'm just going to get on with my life. It's fine. However, a dire emergency happened. Well, a sort of dire emergency. The next week, walking to the bus, I started to sprint a little, and then I heard this ping, and my right leg no longer held my weight, and I just totally collapsed on the road, walking to the bus. Like, literally, I just got to the curb and I just totally collapsed. So this was the opposite leg from the not quite broken foot from the month before. Anyway, somehow I managed to get into work, even though no one would give up their seat for me on the bus, and it was really busy. And I was like, oh my God, I'm standing on one leg. And this is the leg that still kind of hurts from before, because I could put no weight on the other one. It just wasn't working at all. By now, the kids are in, the term's fully started, and, I've got a full teaching timetable. So, yeah, the school nurse was also here. She saw me, muttered something to me about taking more magnesium, and then sprayed me with this cold ice spray and put a bandage on my leg. And I thought I could maybe sort of just stand on it a little bit, like if I went right on my tippy toes, but it was still really painful. So I taught all morning from like my wheelie chair, just wheeling up and down the classroom. But the school nurse had said to me, come and see her again at break time. So I tried to go and see her, but I couldn't wait there at all. Like my leg there was just no way I was able to stand on it. So I wheeled myself along the corridor to the staff room and then just collapsed on the sofa. Now, I had insurance by this point. I'd been there for more than 30 days. I didn't, however, know how to use it. I hadn't set it up yet, and it was all complicated and mostly in Polish. So my boss came over and she called them and she got it all set up and booked me in for an appointment at a hospital. And I called myself an Uber to take me there. So I arrived, queued on one leg to book in, and then was promptly told that I was at the wrong hospital. And this doctor that I was trying to see worked at the hospital with the same name, which is part of the same group, but completely across the other side of the city. I was just, she could probably tell from my face as my face just started to crumple. She was like, we'll find someone to see you. And so they found someone to see me. Now, this doctor diagnosed me with a ligament injury and signed me off work for 2 weeks. And I was like, I can't be off work for 2 weeks. And he was like, you must, you cannot walk on it. He was also worried about DVT, which was becoming a bit of a thing, I would see. I was like, oh, the last doctor I saw was worried about DVT. And he asked me to book in for an ultrasound straight away. He was like, straight away, go book in an ultrasound. So I left his office, paid the bill, and went down to the radiography department and tried to book an ultrasound. 3 weeks' time, she said to me. I said, no. The doctor wants me to have it now because he wants to see me in 2 weeks and he wants to be able to check it. And she's like, no appointments. I thought, bloody hell, am I going to die of DVT because I have a blood clot and because there are no appointments? Then I actually remembered I had those blood thinner injections from the last time, and I thought maybe I could just take those and make sure I don't get DVT. But she was like, just try a different hospital. So I was like, okay, good plan. So I sat down for a minute to book an Uber. And as I was sitting, I saw this sign in Polish, like a poster, telling women over 45 to book a mammogram. And I felt that little lump again. Was it bigger? So back at home, I called the insurance and I made an ultrasound appointment for a different hospital. I was perusing their whole website now and looking at all the different hospitals and all the different types of doctors they had and all the languages that they spoke. And that was when I wondered, what type of doctor do you need for a breast lump? So I Googled it. The answer came up gynecologist, So I called the insurance line again and got exactly the same guy who must have been thinking, what is going on with this woman? She just phoned to make an appointment with a doctor that only does telephone appointments. And now she's phoning for a doctor. Then she phoned to try and book some ultrasounds. And she was like being really fussy about what hospital she wanted. And here she is again. What does she want now? And I was like, I want a gynecologist. And he's like, oh, okay, I'll get you on. And we booked in for a gynecologist in 2 evenings' time in yet another hospital in Warsaw. So I arrived and the queue to check in was very long. I mean, partly because everyone had to stand 2 meters apart. You had to attend alone, and I'd come in an Uber by myself. So this is how I came to be finding myself standing on one leg in a long snaking queue, all alone in a foreign hospital, wondering if I had cancer. I eventually checked in and was sent upstairs to wait for my appointment. And there was an old lady. There was only one person in the queue in front of me, an old lady with her daughter. And I thought, good, it won't be too long. Well, I was wrong. After the old lady went in, the clock just actually seemed to stop. And I was doing like Sporkle quizzles on my phone to try and distract myself. I've since realized something about myself, which is that memorizing things and trying to recall them is something that I can use to calm myself down. I was really obsessively learning things back then. I hadn't realized how stressed I was now. It's actually like a huge part of what I do now, learning myths to tell aloud. I find it really regulating. I write them myself, then I learn them, I walk with them. And yeah, it's really interesting how, and then even like the other day when I went to the dentist, I was retelling myself the myth in my head while I was to calm myself in the dentist chair. So, slight diversion there. Top tip for you though: memorization seems to help calm you down. Well, it works for me anyway. Anyway, yeah. Oh no. So I was telling you I was doing Sporkle, wasn't I? So yeah, I was back then. I was learning American presidents, countries of the world, UK prime ministers. And for some mad reason, probably to do with all the Catholic cathedrals I'd come across, I'd decided to try and learn all the popes in order as well. Never did achieve that one. But the thoughts were really too loud. They were cutting in all the time. It was impossible to just focus. I tried to do countries of the world because I knew them the best. I put the phone away and I thought I'm just going to try and memorize them. But the thought was just kept cutting in. Is this cancer? And the thoughts were also using the scant knowledge and ridiculous theories that I had to try and wrestle this question to become settled in my mind, which of course I couldn't. Albania, Algeria, Afghanistan. It probably is cancer. Remember that dream you had? You can't trust a dream. Bolivia, Botswana. But you are quite low risk, and it can be all sorts of other things like Chile, Colombia. The little old lady came out of the doctor's room, urine dripping down her legs onto the floor, and a woman in a white coat with short, thin curls in a not quite natural red appeared at the door and shouted something in Polish. A minute later, a woman arrived with a bucket and a mop. The little old lady and her daughter came back from the toilet and went back into the room. Denmark, Djibouti. Are there any other Ds? I should do some pelvic floor exercises. Is it cancer? Is it cancer? The lump hurts. They say cancer lumps don't hurt. It feels like cancer. It does feel like other cancer lumps. Gillian, how can you know that? You have felt one other cancer lump in your life. Yeah, but when I got into the room, the gynecologist looked at me and said, with no warmth or humour, just matter of fact, so you have made appointment because you have tumour, yes? I said, well, I don't know if it's a tumour, it's a lump. You had mammogram? No. How long? Huh? How long? How long tumour? Oh, a few weeks. She drew in her breath. Take off your shirt. Stand here, hands up. She felt the lump, and under my arms. Yes, tumour. Here is number of oncologist, best in Warsaw. Only see her. She is best. Okay, also make mammogram and ultrasound appointment. And biopsy. Okay. Good luck. Goodbye. I made my appointments, got the Uber home and sat in shock. I told my husband, and then I tried to make an appointment with the best breast oncologist in Warsaw, but she was fully booked until late October. This was early September. I sat on the bed and I thought, I'll be dead by then. So I made my biopsy appointment with another oncologist for 2 weeks' time, and my ultrasound was in a week, and my mammogram was the same day as the ultrasound, although the results for that were going to take 10 days. And I ended up having to reschedule the biopsy as the doctor wouldn't do it until I'd had my mammogram results. This was all starting to feel very complicated, and I was not sure if I could do cancer treatment in this system, if that's what this was. And that's what that gynecologist had said. She'd said tumor. Now, I know she just meant lump. It's just her way of saying lump. I know this now. And I knew I had to get tests, and I knew I had to find out what was actually wrong with me. And I wasn't 100% sure, but I was really starting to think it was cancer. And I didn't know if I could do that here because this system was so confusing, and I felt really out of my depth, and I felt really alone. And if this is what was required of me, maybe I should just go back to the UK. But that would mean leaving my daughter and my husband. I mean, giving up my new job. And, anyway, Gillian, loads of people tackle foreign health systems, and you had an operation in Abu Dhabi, and you had your finger reset in Mongolia. The voice of the good girl told me, don't make a fuss, you can do this. But over the course of the next few weeks, there were more confusing doctor appointments, signing consent papers in Polish because they'd ran out of English versions, using Google Translate to read your test results, and then trying to figure out what they meant from a Canadian trainee radiographer website. No one allowed to come with you to appointments, unexpected bills the insurance didn't cover, trying to figure it all out, and then the biopsy day and coming home to an empty apartment while my husband went back to his job. And I thought, I can't do this. Well, actually, I can do this. But let's be really honest, I don't want to. I don't want to keep being the person that can do it, that can push through, that can do it all. I want to be at home with my mum bringing me a cup of tea, and I want to talk to doctors that I can communicate with and have the specialist breast care nurses on the end of the phone to ask questions of and provide the support. And I know I can have all this in the UK, and I can go home. All I've got to do is get on a plane and go, leave my job, surrender my residency, and go home. I thought I could stay. I could do this if I'd been here longer, if I spoke better Polish, if I'd built more of a support network, if there wasn't a bloody pandemic. In the end, it was the pandemic that decided for me. A new strain was showing up in London, and there was talk of Europe closing borders. And I thought, shit, if I don't go now, I never will. So I resigned on the Monday and was on a flight on the Wednesday. On Tuesday, of course, the good girl in me went into work and wrote half-term reports for all her classes, again in Polish, using Google Translate. On Tuesday night, my boss called me to say she'd received a call from the oncologist with my biopsy test results. They'd rang her because her number was registered as the contact form that time, if you remember back, with a broken leg foot thing, where she'd called to set up my account. And she told me that the biopsy results had come in and that my test results were inconclusive. All this time, I'd started this process in early September. It was now the 12th of October, I think, something like that. And I'd been in this system for this whole time, and I still didn't know whether I had cancer or not. She was saying something on the phone to me. I wasn't really listening, about a red dye and they wanting to do it again. And I was like, I don't care. I'm going home. I'm getting on a plane tomorrow and I'm going home. So that's what I did. I got on a plane to England. I left my husband and daughter, still not knowing if I had cancer, and wondering once again when or if I'd ever see them again. Thanks for listening. And yeah, I hope you'll tune in next week when I'm going to be talking about the very best Zoom Christmas ever. Also, you can sign up to my newsletter on www.beyondthegoodgirlpodcast.com, and or you can go to Substack, just search Gillian Ray. You'll find my newsletter sign up on there as well. If you want to find out a bit more about other things I'm up to, you can also head on over to my website as well. And yeah, until next week then. Thank you again.